Power creep. Pretty much all of us hate it. But what is power creep? Why is it bad? And how does this actually affect Grand Summoners? Well, I hope to at least shed some light on this topic in today's video. For one, what is power creep? Power creep is quite literally out with the old, in with the new. When the old stuff is starting to become too dated or too weak compared to the newer release content, whether that be gear, equipment, armor, characters, doesn't matter. That's when power creep starts to take effect, where the old stuff just isn't gonna cut it anymore and you need to grind or summon or spend money to acquire the newer items. And usually this is completely tied to content difficulty in video games, where the harder stuff gets, of course you yourself need to be stronger in order to tackle this type of content, which you can see why this is extremely apparent in gaming as a whole, but mainly in gacha games, because this is kind of the way how they survive in the grand scheme of things. If they just released something that was good from the start and that was it, they never released something that topped that, then you could imagine revenue would never really go up. It would kind of just stay the same, or it would plummet due to the fact that there's no reason to keep summoning or spending money on the game. And this is pretty much why it's hated throughout the gacha scene. Because imagine you invested all your time, all your money, all your effort, energy, whatever you want to say, into a unit. And then about 6 months to a year later, that unit that you invested all your money and all your energy into is no longer top of the pack and is now like kind of middle of the pack. They're not as good. They're not the sharpest tool in the shed. They're just kind of whatever now. And I think power creep is actually tied directly to the success of a game in the long term, at least from the gacha scene. If you're power creeping something every single week, well, more than likely your player base isn't going to stay. This was most apparent with something like 7 Deadly Sins Global whenever it first released, where every week or every other week they were releasing something that was so meta breaking where you needed to get it because they were skipping around so much, and if you didn't wind up getting it, well, you just couldn't compete with everyone else in the community. But how does this play into Grand Summoners? What's the deal with power creep in GS? Well, this is a topic that I actually want to talk about because I saw in my Discord, I actually asked me how I felt about the meta changing in the Japanese version of the game. And because of that, we're going to be talking mainly about the Japanese version, since that's pretty much the future of global. And the exact thing that I want to focus on is that the fact that he said the units that we considered top tier last year are outdated on JP already. I want to take a deep dive into this and really see if this is the case or not. So let's look at the most notable units that released last year in 2021 for the Japanese version of Grand Summoners. You have, for one, Tensura. You also have Miranda, Batiste, the Hatsune Mikus, Priscilla, Simon, Dark Haruto, Shaman King units, Summer Juno, and Leon, Volti, Emmy, Awoken Reyes, Jobless Reincarnation, Phantom Bullet Priscilla, Volti LR, Joker Celia, and the most known unit out of them all, of course, Emperor. And there were definitely more units that released last year in JP, but these were the ones that I picked out that I considered, top of the pack, the ones that everybody was looking out for. So let's look through them real quick, shall we, and see who is still there and who's kind of fallen off. Well, we look at Tensura. Tensura released a few different units. Of course, you had the base Tensura units, which were Rimuru, Milim, and Benimaru. You also had the Christmas units, which were Rimuru, Milim, and Santa Shion. Then you had the New Year's units, which were Rimuru and Milim. Now, of all these units, I would say that majority of them have fallen off for the most part. The only ones that really had staying power were more of the supporting ones, like base Rimuru and Santa Rimuru. As far as everyone else, there's pretty much other units that came out that's just better in a lot of regards than, New Year's Rimuru or Santa Shion and stuff like that. Really, the only attacker that's kind of made it out the hood from this crossover was New Year's Milim, because she's still being used in light nuke compositions, but outside of that, you rarely ever see her. As far as Miranda goes, Miranda, of course, is still the best magic tank in the game. She has one of the best ramping skills, and I would say that she's still top tier, and there's no one that really does her job better at the moment. You have the Hatsune Mikus, which I would say the Water Miku completely fell off. I don't ever see her being used just because there's too many good water units that it's hard to use her. However, the Earth Miku, Sakura Miku, is completely different. She actually is still being used and is one of the best Earth units in the entire game still to this day. You have the Phantom Sniper units, which are Priscilla, Simon, and Dark Haruto. All three of these units are still good and still being used used, especially Priscilla. I think Priscilla may be the most used unit out of all these three. Unless you like are talking specifically about nuking, then it's probably Simon. One crossover that's actually kind of surprising to me that's fallen off so hard in my opinion was actually the Shaman King units. Really, in my opinion, the one that stayed the longest was of course the support unit, which was Yo. Yo is still really good for fire teams and also buffing up physical damage, but as for everyone else, it's kind of whatever. Tao Rin was garbage on release, so of course he never had any staying power. Anna was pretty good, but she's kind of niche. And then you had Hao, which Hao is still good. I don't want to say Hao is bad, but there's a lot of options that came out to JP that are just a lot more appealing nowadays than I would say Hao is. Summer Juno and Summer Leon, solid units. Summer Juno, definitely the better one out of the two, and is still used in pretty much every single magic comp that you can sustain in. You're probably going to be throwing Summer Juno in there just so you can buff up your damage even more. And then Summer Leon is Summer Leon. Yeah, this unit's whatever. Volti's still a really strong water nuker. Emmy is Emmy. She's just bad. I don't like this unit at all, and I think that majority of people will probably say yes, she's just not good. Now here's one that's actually kind of surprising. Awoken Reyes. Has he been power creeped, or has he fallen off, or is he about the same? Well, whenever you consider what Awoken Reyes is supposed to be, I would say that he's still doing a really good job. If you are able to obtain him, it's supposed to be a free unit that you get by just playing the game and being like a newer player. Of course, the fight that you have to go up against to get him is extremely difficult, and it's probably something that not a lot of new players can get, but if you do obtain him, he is very solid. He's a very good unit, a very strong unit. He's not trying to be the best unit in the game, but he's a very good option to put on pretty much majority of teams, which is why I say he hasn't fallen off either. He's still really good at what he does. Next, Jobless Reincarnation. The only one that made it out from this, in my opinion, was Rudius, one of the strongest earth damage dealers in the game still. Hell, one of the strongest damage dealers in the game. And what's the other one? The one that I don't like? Selfie? Is that her name? No, that's from Final Fantasy VIII. What's her name? Is it Selfie? No, it's not Selfie. It starts with an, you guys know who I'm talking about. Volti LR, I think, was kind of whatever on release, but with the release of a later character, which is Emperor, I think he got a lot better because he has a lot of synergy with Emperor due to the fact that he can kind of increase his tanking to an extent. But not only that, of course, with human meta being the thing that it is on JP, which we'll be discussing that in a second, it kind of does nothing but help Volti LR in the long run, and he probably has one of the highest damage potentials in the game. Joker Celia is still one of the best mines units in JP and global. And then we have Emperor, which is literally the best unit that's ever released on JP and soon to be global within the next few months. So if you look at that, I would say majority of characters are still really good. I don't think too many characters have fallen off. There have been some characters that have kind of, you know, become a little bit lackluster, you know, lost their shine a little bit, but for the most part, everyone's kind of still there. From this comment where Haya said that the units we consider top tier are no longer top tier. Well, I don't think that you're talking specifically about the units that released last year. I think what you're seeing is the meta shift that is currently happening on JP that has been a year and a half in the making, and it's currently what global is going through. And what is this meta shift, you may ask? Well, you all know the Blood Knights. The Blood Knights were king in Grand Summoners for the longest, right? Ever since their release, they pretty much had a hold. I'm talking about the strongest grip on the meta you could ever imagine. And pretty much what it was that they became so strong to the point to where you didn't need any other unit. If you had Vox, if you had Juno, you were set. You had Thetis, you're good. Berwick, great addition. Once you had them, you could beat pretty much all the content in the game easily unless they were countered in it, which is why, you know, a lot of events pretty much had to hard counter the Blood Knights. So if you see it from that type of standpoint, you look at it and it's like, well, not only is this bad for business because these characters are so strong and they're so good, it's also bad for the state of the game because in the long term, it's like, well, it's kind of stale. We all use the same units 24/7. There's no real addition, you know, there's no real reason to go for anyone else because we already have the best stuff in the game. So what did Grand Summoners have to do? Well, the JP team literally had to change the entire meta, not just release a new unit that was stronger, but they had to release units that were so good that complemented each other to the point to where the Blood Knights were just kind of pushed to the side, which is what I would like to call the human meta. And this all started with the Phantom Sniper saga, which kind of dawned the end of an era because this was the beginning of the end of the Blood Knight's reign. With the release of Haruto, he was the first one that kind of led the charge of this human meta possibly being a thing. Due to the fact that he was able to buff up and arch and heal characters so much if they were human, it kind of led on to being like, okay, this would be good if we had better human characters. And that's what happened within the next year. As you saw, you had Priscilla that released, Simon, Dark Haruto, you had other characters like Volti, Rudius, and then finally, you had someone that could top all of them that was a human, which was Emperor. Emperor is literally the strongest character to ever release and solidify this meta shift due to the fact that Emperor has the unique position mechanic to where he's pretty much effective against any type of enemy you throw at him, and the fact that he provides so many buffs to his team. He pretty much was the cherry on top, the crown to the human meta. Once he released, everything that came after him was specifically playing his game, and that's exactly what happened. That's why you see a lot of these characters not even used anymore, which we didn't even talk about the characters that came after Emperor. Like for an example, Charlotte, that is literally an amazing damage buffer for pretty much any team, but not only for pretty much any team, specifically she's a human, so she can be used with any human team. She has tons of synergy there. And then you also release the new Ninja Saga, which, you know, have the new Mizukis and everything else, which they're all human too, so they can be used with other human teams. There's tons of synergy. So would I say that all of these characters got power creep? In theory, I would say yeah. Most of the Blood Knights or all of the demons that we all know and love have pretty much all kind of just been swept under the rug. However, at the same time, I don't think it's the same thing as so much more as a meta shift, because these characters are still good. There's nothing wrong with Berwick. There's nothing wrong with Vox or anybody else. Of course, their damage is a little bit lower nowadays compared to what's releasing on JP, but kit-wise and everything else, they're still good. And unfortunately, there just isn't any demon or any type of unit that's releasing on JP that kind of synergizes with them enough to, you know, kind of put them back on top. They tried to release units that were demons on JP to kind of, you know, bring these guys back up, you know, stuff like the other versions of the Blood Knights, like Thetis and Rivi, but they were kind of just whatever. There's even some units now that are just demons that weren't demons before, like Fire or Veil, but he's just amazing on his own, and he's a demon. So it's not just like, oh, you're not a human, you're trash. It's just more so there's specific characters that are just really good now compared to others, and majority of them happen to be humans. Here's my answer to the question of power creep, the meta, all that. What's the deal with? Power creep is a thing that is inevitable in any gacha game. You cannot prevent it as long as the gacha game is going on. At some point, stuff will become weaker than the newer stuff that's being released. Of course, there are ways to combat power creep to kind of, you know, make your investment worthwhile. You know, you see this a lot in other mobile games, like Dokkan has the Extreme Z Awakening. You have stuff like Dissidia, which constantly buff their old units, pretty much every single re-release of that unit. Or you have other games that just completely rework a character once they become too dated because they want to bring them back into the spotlight. Will GS take one of these paths? Who knows? I think it's possible, so it shouldn't be completely ruled out. So we'll just have to wait and see. As far as the meta and how it's shifting, I think that the meta is going to stay something like this for quite a while, due to the fact that they kind of dug themselves a hole and they made a unit so strong that they probably don't know how exactly to make something that's better than Emperor, because Emperor is kind of the ultimate unit. Like, how do you beat that? Well, you just kind of have to make something that's stronger than him. But if you make something that's stronger than him, then what about the content in the game? Which is a completely different topic, because at the end of the day, the stronger you make these units, you have to release content that's able to challenge these units, or you just run over all the content that you currently have and there's nothing really challenging, and players just lose interest due to the fact that the game's just stale and everything's the same. So that's what I think about it. And at the end of the day, I always just say, it is what it is. So thank you all for coming out. It's been your bro OP. If you enjoyed this video, highly recommend you check out either one of the videos popping up on your screen right now. Great content, guarantee you'll love them. And if you enjoyed this video, you know, like the video. I don't usually ask for likes too much, but it would greatly be appreciated. Or if you're new around here, hey, subscribe. But thank you all again for coming out. And last but not least, you guys already know, don't forget to drink water.